Night shift. Thomas Smith, a young doctor's assistant, was nervously preparing for his first night shift at the psychiatric hospital for the criminally insane. His partner, Jack, had suddenly stopped responding to calls, which gave Thomas an uneasy feeling. However, duty called, and he couldn't leave the patients unattended. The Midnight Hill Psychiatric Hospital was known for its grim reputation. High gray walls and iron gates resembled a prison. Inside, there was an atmosphere of oppressive silence and constant tension. Behind thick metal doors were people whose minds were engulfed in deep darkness. The beginning of anxiety. The first thing Thomas noticed upon entering the building was the unusual silence. He walked down the long corridors, checking each cell. All the patients were in place, but the feeling that someone was watching him did not leave him. As he passed by the farthest cell, Thomas stopped. Inside was Mr. Stone, a patient with the most terrifying reputation. It was said that he was extremely dangerous and unpredictable. But now Stone seemed calm, sitting in the corner of his cell. Thomas quickly looked away and continued his rounds. Anxiety intensifies. About 5 hours into his shift, Thomas began to notice oddities. It seemed that shadows were moving around the corners, and the sounds of footsteps echoed through the corridors. Each time he checked the cells, he saw Mr. Stone in place. But with each passing minute, the feeling of anxiety grew stronger. Thomas decided to check the surveillance footage. As he watched the recordings, he noticed something strange. At certain moments, the camera aimed at Mr. Stone's cell would go off for a few seconds and then come back on, showing Stone still in the same place. Meeting Mr. Stone, Thomas decided to make another round. When he approached Mr. Stone's cell again, his heart froze. The cell was empty. A slight creak sounded behind him, and Thomas turned sharply. Standing before him was Mr. Stone, cold and silent. "You're here alone, Thomas," Stone said quietly. "Do you think you're safe?" Thomas stepped back, trying to grasp what was happening. But Stone didn't give him time to think, quickly moving forward. A chase began through the dark corridors. A deadly game of tag. Stone chased Thomas, making sinister, raspy sounds. Thomas ran with all his might, feeling adrenaline surge through him. He found shelter in one of the empty rooms, trying to catch his breath and come up with a plan. Stone, seemingly enjoying the game, slowly approached Thomas's hiding place. Thomas grabbed a heavy metal pipe lying on the floor and prepared for the final fight. When Stone entered the room, Thomas swung the pipe but missed. Stone snatched the pipe from him and struck, knocking Thomas to the ground. The final struggle. Thomas, feeling a sharp pain in his head, managed to get back on his feet. Stone was approaching, holding the pipe. Thomas needed to find a way to stop him. He noticed an old, rusty sword on the wall, a part of the decor forgotten in this abandoned wing of the hospital. Thomas grabbed the sword and, gritting his teeth, prepared for the fight. Stone lunged, but Thomas managed to dodge and strike back. The sword pierced Stone, and with a dull groan, he collapsed to the floor. Thomas, breathing heavily, looked at the motionless body, feeling the tension leave him. Morning horror. In the morning, when the doctors and other staff came on duty, they found Thomas sitting in the corridor with the sword in his hands. His eyes were full of despair and horror. The doctors tried to calm him down, asking questions, but he seemed not to understand them. "It's me, Thomas," he repeated. "I killed Mr. Stone. He wanted to kill me." The doctors exchanged worried glances. They knew Thomas as patient Torment, who was locked in one of the cells for his uncontrollable aggression and hallucinations. They couldn't understand how he had gotten free. Returned to the cell. The doctors led Thomas back to his cell, trying to reassure him that everything would be okay. He continued to tell his story, insisting he was just defending himself. But when they reached the place where the struggle had occurred, horror gripped everyone. A mutilated body lay on the floor. The doctors recognized it with horror as one of their colleagues. The body was mangled beyond recognition, and blood covered the walls and floor. Screams of horror echoed through the corridors. "That's not him," one of the doctors whispered, looking at Torment. "That's not Stone. That was Dr. Jack. End of the game. The doctors, overwhelmed with panic, tried to restrain Torment, but he resisted with unexpected strength. In the end, 3 people died before they managed to lock Torment back in his cell. All this time he was screaming and begging for mercy, claiming he didn't understand what was happening. When the cell door finally closed, silence returned to the hospital. The doctors stood, stunned by horror and shock. They had to figure out what really happened that night. Conclusion. The Midnight Hill Psychiatric Hospital would never be the same. The mystery of that night remained unsolved. Thomas, also known as Patient Torment, was back behind bars, but his eyes were still full of terror and despair. His stories about Mr. Stone and the deadly struggle became just another enigma in the string of dark secrets of this place. The doctors continued their work, but every time night fell on the hospital, the shadows in the corridors seemed a bit more sinister, and the sounds a bit more frightening. No one knew what really happened that ill-fated night, and perhaps no one ever would.